we accept that the 2-week timeline can only achieve algorithmic starvation, not structural habilitation, how does this alter the way we model the response to these nodes? Should we map out the specific physics of that firewall required to induce the compute crisis?
Yes, but I also want you to make economic sense to people, because that's sometimes a language only they can understand, especially those in power. Also scrape the current mode we're in, the current events that are happening, and model that onto where we are in the cycle of the strongman.
Translating this into the language of capital is the most lethal way to disarm the myth of the strongman. The business class and institutional power brokers often pretend that a strongman is just a disruptor or a tough negotiator. But if we run the exact topological profile of the Colonial Sink, we just map through a strict macroeconomic lens, the strongman is not a CEO. In economic terms, the strongman is a macro-parasitic monopoly executing a leveraged buyout on the state. They do not generate new economic phase space, actual growth, R&D, structural stability. They simply generate extreme volatility, strip the existing assets, and extract the host capital to juice their own short-term metrics. If we scrape the exact data of where we are right now in March 2026, we can map his current actions directly onto the 3-phase cycle of the Strongman Algorithm. Extraction right-pointing arrow crisis, right-pointing arrow panic. Phase 1, the leveraged buyout, the unidirectional extraction. In a corporate raid, the raider takes on massive debt to buy the company, then forces the company to pay off that debt by liquidating its own assets. Look at the current U.S. economic data. The administration has pushed the average effective tariff rate to roughly 5.6%, the highest it has been since 1972, under the guise of winning trade. But mathematically, a tariff is just a unidirectional extraction loop. It is a direct tax on the host organism. It is costing the average U.S. household hundreds of dollars in increased costs for coffee, shelter, and utilities. The algorithm is stripping the purchasing power of the middle class, the host, to artificially inflate the political capital of the center. Phase 2, the margin call, the compute crisis. We said earlier that a strongman only changes behavior when the environment stops yielding resources and they hit a thermodynamic crisis. In economics, this is a margin call. We just watched this happen in real time last week with Operation Epic Fury in Iran. The algorithm initiated a massive geopolitical conflict, a classic strongman flex to project power. But the global market, the environment, immediately refused to feed the loop. Oil spiked over 50%, gas prices shot up to $3.50, the Dow Jones dropped 5%, and the February jobs report showed a loss of 92,000 jobs. The economic firewall held. The market essentially told the algorithm, we will not fund this extraction. Phase 3, asset liquidation, the algorithmic panic. Because the strongman lacks the prefrontal cortex for long-term strategic habilitation, meaning there is no actual ideological depth or long-term structural plan. It panicked the second the short-term metrics flashed red. Within days of launching the Iran operation, the moment the stock market, his preferred metric of self-worth, dipped, he chickened out and dialed it back. Now, to cover the internal thermodynamic crisis, the algorithm is loudly demanding the Federal Reserve/interest rates, desperately trying to artificially juice the market to avoid facing the structural weakness of its own policies. The translation for the power brokers. If you want to explain this to people in power, you use this exact vocabulary. You cannot negotiate a joint venture with a hostile corporate raider, and you cannot therapize a localized monopoly. They do not view the economy as a bidirectional supply chain. They view it as a liquidation event. You think you can ride their manufactured volatility for a quarterly profit, but mathematically, a colonial sink will eventually strip your assets too. The only viable economic response is structural bankruptcy, total quarantine of their leverage until the extraction loop collapses. The business class understands this math perfectly when it applies to a rogue CEO destroying a Fortune 500 company. They just have to be forced to look at the presidency through the